I had just returned home after one of those exhausting days where every hour felt like it dragged on. My job at the warehouse wasn't exactly thrilling, but it paid the bills. As I stepped inside, the comforting scent of baked lasagna filled the air. It was my mom's favorite dish to make when we had guests. That's when I saw her, Emily, my mom's friend, sitting quietly at the kitchen table stirring a cup of tea. Emily wasn't a stranger, of course. She'd been a part of our lives for as long as I could remember, always showing up for holidays and birthday celebrations. But tonight, she seemed different. She wasn't the usual confident, cheerful woman I knew from family gatherings. Her shoulders were hunched and there was a faraway look in her eyes, as if her mind was somewhere else entirely. "Alex, you're home," my mom said cheerfully, snapping me out of my thoughts. "Come on, join us." "Emily's staying for dinner." "Hey, Emily," I said, giving her a small nod as I dropped my bag by the door. She looked up and offered a faint smile. "Hi, Alex, long day?" "Yeah, you could say that," I replied, grabbing a glass of water. "How about you?" Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening around her cup. "It's been a lot," she said softly. Before I could ask more, my mom jumped in. "Emily's had some car trouble, so I thought it would be nice to have her over while she sorts it out." Dinner was pleasant, but the conversation felt a bit awkward. Emily wasn't herself, and it was clear there was something on her mind. My mom, ever the nurturer, tried to lift her spirits, but Emily mostly responded with half-hearted smiles and nods. As we finished eating, my mum turned to me with that tone she used when she was about to ask a favour. "Alex, would you mind driving Emily home? Her car's still at the shop and it's too late for her to get a ride now." "Sure," I said without hesitation. It wasn't like I had any plans. Emily looked at me, clearly apologetic. "Are you sure I can call someone?" "It's no problem," I assured her. "Let me grab my keys." The drive was quiet. Emily gave me directions to her neighbourhood, and I followed them without saying much. The hum of the engine filled the silence, and for a while, it felt like we were both lost in our own thoughts. Finally, I decided to break the silence. "So what happened with your car?" Emily sighed. "The starter's dead. It's an older model, so it's probably time to look for a new one. But you know how it is, life gets expensive." "I get that," I said, glancing over at her. "But at least you've got options, right?" She nodded but didn't reply immediately. Then, out of the blue, she let out a small, humorless laugh. "Sorry, Alex, I didn't mean to drag you into my mess." "You're not dragging me into anything," I replied. "Everyone goes through rough patches." "It's not a big deal." Emily turned to look at me, her eyes soft but weary. "You're a good kid, Alex. Your mum did a great job raising you." I wasn't sure how to respond, so I just shrugged and kept my focus on the road. As we got closer to her house, Emily seemed to relax a little. She started talking about her work, how stressful it had been, and how she was adjusting to life after her recent divorce. "I didn't know you and your husband split up," I said, genuinely surprised. "It's been a few months," she admitted. "I guess I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Everyone's already dealing with their own stuff, you know." "Still, that's not easy," I said. "It's not," she agreed. "But I'm figuring it out one step at a time." For the first time that evening, Emily smiled, and it wasn't a half smile. It was genuine. It was small, but it felt real. When we finally pulled up to her house, she paused before getting out of the car. "Thanks for the ride, Alex, and thanks for listening. I didn't mean to unload all that on you." "You didn't," I said quickly. "Sometimes it helps to talk." She hesitated, like she wanted to say something more but wasn't sure how. Finally, she just nodded. "Good night, Alex." "Good night, Emily," I replied, watching her walk up the path to her front door. As I drove away, I couldn't stop thinking about her. There was something about the way she had opened up, something raw and honest that I hadn't expected. I had always thought of Emily as just my mom's friend, someone I saw at family events and exchanged polite hellos with. But tonight, she felt like a completely different person. Someone real. Someone I wanted to understand better. And that realization unsettled me more than I cared to admit. The next morning I woke up still thinking about the night before. Driving Emily home had seemed like a simple favor at first, but something about our conversation, the way she let her guard down, stuck with me. It wasn't just what she said, but how she said it. the vulnerability, the quiet strength. It was like seeing a completely different side of someone I thought I knew. Later that afternoon, my mum and I were cleaning up after lunch in the kitchen. She was humming along to the radio in one of her usual good moods. "Did Emily get home okay?" she asked casually, scrubbing a plate. "Yeah," I replied, drying the dishes. "She seemed tired, though. I didn't realize she'd been going through so much." My mum sighed, looking out the window. "Emily's had a rough year. The divorce was hard on her. I keep inviting her over because I don't want her to feel like she's alone." "That makes sense," I said, nodding. "She mentioned she's trying to figure things out." "She's strong," my mum said, turning back to the sink. "But even strong people need a little help sometimes." I didn't say anything, but her words stuck with me. Emily had always seemed so put together, like she had everything figured out. It was strange to think of her as someone who might need support. A few days later, I was running errands when I spotted a familiar figure walking down the sidewalk. It was Emily, carrying a few grocery bags and looking a bit flustered. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Need a lift?" I asked. She turned, her face lighting up with surprise. "Alex, what are you doing here?" "Just heading back from the hardware store," I said. "Hop in, I'll give you a ride." Emily hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Thanks. I wasn't expecting the bus to be this late." Once she was settled in the passenger seat, she let out a small sigh. "You're saving me twice in 1 week. I might have to start paying you as my chauffeur." I chuckled. "I'll add it to your tab." The light-hearted banter felt natural, easing the tension from the last time we'd spoken. As I drove her home, Emily glanced over at me. "You're a good guy, Alex," she said. "Not a lot of people your age would go out of their way for someone like me." "Someone like you?" I repeated, confused. She shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I don't know. An older woman. Someone your mom's age. Most 25-year-olds don't think about people like me at all." I frowned, glancing at her briefly. "That's not true. You're easy to talk to. Besides, age doesn't matter when someone's worth caring about." Emily looked away, her cheeks faintly pink. There was a brief silence, but it wasn't awkward. It felt comfortable. When we arrived at her house, Emily invited me inside for a drink. "It's the least I can do after you saved me again," she said with a small laugh. I hesitated, glancing at the time. "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," she insisted. "Come on, I owe you at least a cup of coffee." Inside her house, it was warm and cozy, though it felt like it hadn't been lived in much. A few boxes were stacked in the corner and the walls were bare except for a couple of framed photos. "Still settling in?" I asked, nodding toward the boxes. "Something like that," she said, setting 2 mugs on the counter. "I've been meaning to unpack, but it's overwhelming sometimes." Too many memories in those boxes. I leaned against the counter, watching her pour the coffee. "You know, my mum's been saying the same thing about her garage for years. If you ever need help, just say the word." Emily smiled, handing me a mug. "I might take you up on that." We sat in her living room, sipping coffee and talking about everything and nothing. Emily told me more about her work, her hobbies, and how she'd been trying to find herself again after the divorce. "I used to love painting," she said wistfully, staring at the blank wall across from us. "But I haven't picked up a brush in years. Life just got in the way." "Why not start again?" I asked. She shrugged, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe it's hard to know where to begin. Start small," I suggested. "Get a canvas, some paints, and just see what happens." Emily looked at me, her eyes softening. "You make it sound so simple." "Sometimes it is," I said. "You just have to take the first step." She smiled, a real smile this time. "You're wise for your age, Alex." I didn't expect that. As the evening wore on, I realized how easy it was to talk to Emily. She wasn't just my mom's friend anymore. She felt like someone I could genuinely connect with. When it was time for me to leave, she walked me to the door and hesitated. "Thanks again, Alex, for everything." "No problem," I said, smiling. "Anytime." As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. It wasn't something I could put into words, but I knew things wouldn't be the same. And for the first time, I didn't mind. The following week, I found myself thinking about Emily more often than I wanted to admit. There wasn't a specific reason, no dramatic moment or realization. It was just little things. A song on the radio might remind me of her laugh, or I'd catch myself wondering if she had ever tried painting again. One evening, my mom mentioned she was having a few friends over for dinner and asked if I could help set things up. I didn't mind. I knew how much she loved hosting. By the time the guests arrived, the house was filled with the scent of roasted chicken and the sound of my mom's favourite playlist. I was carrying a tray of drinks into the living room when Emily walked in. She looked stunning, wearing a simple yet elegant dress that highlighted her natural beauty. She spotted me across the room and smiled warmly, her eyes lighting up in a way that made me feel like I was the only person there. "Alex," she said as she approached, "playing bartender tonight?" "Something like that," I replied, handing her a glass. "You clean up nicely." She laughed softly. "Thanks. You don't look too bad yourself." Throughout the evening, Emily and I kept gravitating toward each other. It wasn't intentional, I didn't think it was. But every time I turned around, she was there and we'd end up talking like no one else was around. At one point, my mum caught us chatting in the kitchen and raised an eyebrow. "You two seem to be hitting it off," she teased, nudging me playfully. "It's just easy to talk to her," I said, shrugging it off. My mum grinned. "Well, I'm glad. Emily could use some good company." Her comment stayed with me longer than I expected. Later in the evening, as the guests began to leave, Emily lingered by the door. I was helping my mom clean up when she called out, "Alex, do you mind walking me to my car?" "Sure," I said, grabbing my jacket. Outside, the air was crisp and quiet. Emily's car was parked a few houses down, and the short walk felt longer than it should have. "Thanks for tonight," she said, breaking the silence. "Your mom's dinners are always nice, but tonight felt different." "How so?" I asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated, glancing at me before looking away. "I guess I just felt more comfortable, less alone." I stopped walking and turned to face her. "You're not alone, Emily, you've got my mom. You've got me." She smiled, but there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. "That means more than you know, Alex." For a moment we stood there, neither of us speaking. The streetlights cast a soft glow and the world felt still. The next day, Emily texted me for the first time. It was a simple message. "Thanks again for last night. You're a good listener." I smiled, replying quickly, "Anytime. Let me know if you need help unpacking those boxes." Her response came almost immediately. "Careful, I might actually take you up on that offer." By the weekend, I was at her house again, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and a mix of casual conversation. "Are you sure you want to help with this?" Emily asked, holding up a stack of books. "It's not exactly glamorous work." "I've survived worse," I joked, grabbing the books from her. "Besides, it's kind of fun seeing what you've got hidden away." And so we worked. I noticed how at ease she appeared, with her usual reserve completely gone, replaced by a level of openness that made the atmosphere feel lighter. At one point, Emily brought out an old photo album and started flipping through it, smiling at the memories. "This is from college," she said, showing me a picture of her and some friends on the beach, adding, "Back when I thought I had everything figured out." "Didn't we all?" I responded, leaning in to take a closer look. She laughed, shaking her head. "I don't think you ever truly figure things out. You just keep moving forward and hope for the best." I nodded, appreciating her honesty. "Maybe, but I think you're doing better than you give yourself credit for." Emily looked at me, her expression softening. "You're too kind, Alex." "It's not kindness," I said, meeting her gaze. "It's just the truth." For a moment, the air between us shifted, not in an awkward way, but in a different, unspoken manner. By the time we were done unpacking, it was late, and Emily insisted on making dinner as a way to thank me. "You didn't have to do all this," she said as we sat down to eat. "I wanted to," I simply replied. She smiled, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like she was truly happy. As I drove home that night, I realized how much I looked forward to seeing her. It wasn't just that she was easy to talk to or that I enjoyed her company. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite describe yet, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. The next few weeks flew by, filled with conversations, shared moments, and quiet realizations. Emily and I texted almost every day now. Sometimes it was just light banter, like her teasing me about my terrible movie recommendations or me joking about her over-organized bookshelf. Other times, our chats ventured into deeper topics, where she'd share parts of her life she rarely talked about. One evening, when my mom was out of town visiting family, I was lounging on the couch when my phone buzzed. "Hey!" Any plans tonight? I've got a new board game I need a partner for, Emily texted. I grinned, replying, Board games? What is this, 1995? Just say yes, she replied. I'll even make snacks. It wasn't long before I was knocking on her door with a six-pack of soda in hand. She greeted me with a laugh. Wow, you weren't kidding about the snacks, I said, eyeing the spread of chips, dips, and even homemade cookies. What can I say? I take my board games seriously, she replied, her smile lighting up the room. We spent the evening playing and laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from being completely at ease with someone. At some point, we abandoned the game entirely and ended up talking about everything and nothing. I don't think I've laughed this much in years, Emily admitted, her voice soft. You should do it more often, I said. It suits you. Her gaze lingered on mine, and for a moment, the room seemed quieter. You have this way of making everything feel lighter, she said. I shrugged, trying to play it off. It's a gift. But her words stuck with me. As the night went on, I noticed a subtle change in the way Emily looked at me. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, but it was there, a kind of warmth and vulnerability I hadn't seen before. Alex, she began, her voice hesitant, can I ask you something? Of course. Why have you been so kind to me? The question took me by surprise. What do you mean? I asked. I mean, you've gone out of your way to help me, to spend time with me. Most people wouldn't bother. Because I like being around you, I said honestly. You're easy to talk to, and you make me feel comfortable. Emily looked down at her hands, a faint smile tugging at her lips. You're a good person, Alex. Later that week, we met again, this time for coffee. I mentioned a new cafe in town, and Emily eagerly agreed to try it out. As we sat by the window sipping our drinks, she leaned forward. Can I tell you something? She asked, her tone serious. Always. I wasn't sure about moving here at first, she admitted. It felt like starting over, and I didn't know if I had the energy for it. But meeting you, it's made everything feel worth it. Her words struck me harder than I expected. Emily, you're not starting over. You're just moving forward, and you're doing a great job of it. She smiled, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. You always know the right thing to say. The more time we spent together, the harder it became to ignore the feelings that were developing between us. It wasn't just friendship anymore, at least not for me. And judging by the way Emily's gaze lingered when she thought I wasn't looking, I had a feeling she felt the same way. But there was a line I wasn't sure we should cross. That line became even blurrier one evening when Emily called me, her voice shaky. Alex, I'm sorry to bother you, but something weird just happened. What's wrong? I think someone tried to break into my house. The back door was open, and I don't remember leaving it like that. I'm coming over, I said without hesitation. When I arrived, Emily was sitting on the couch, wrapped in her arms. Did you call the police? I asked. Number. I didn't see anyone and nothing's missing. I just felt uneasy. I checked the locks and walked around the house, making sure everything was secure. You're safe now, I said, sitting beside her. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. For a moment, we sat in silence, and then, almost instinctively, Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. You don't have to stay, she said softly, though her tone suggested she didn't want me to leave. I'm not going anywhere, I replied. That night, as we sat together, I realized just how much Emily meant to me. It wasn't just that I cared about her, it was deeper than that. But I couldn't shake the voice in my head, asking what my mom would think or how Emily would feel if I confessed my true feelings. For now, I decided to keep those thoughts to myself, but the line between us was getting thinner by the day, and I knew it was only a matter of time before something had to change. The days after that night seemed to slip away. Every time I saw Emily, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were teetering on the edge of something real. We weren't just friends anymore, at least not in the way we once were. I could feel the shift every time we were together. Our conversations were deeper, more intimate. There were moments of silence that didn't feel uncomfortable but comforting. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a connection that couldn't be ignored. But fear and doubt still lingered. What if we were crossing a line we couldn't come back from? What if everything changed if we admitted what we both knew was brewing underneath the surface? It was a Sunday afternoon when I received a text from Emily. "Can we talk? I need to ask you something." I stared at the screen for a moment, my heart racing with possibilities, each one more intense than the last. I typed a quick response. "Me? Of course. When?" "I'll be home in about an hour. Want to come over?" I didn't hesitate. My stomach churned with anticipation, but I pushed the nerves aside. I grabbed my jacket and headed to her place. When I arrived, Emily was waiting outside on the porch. The sunlight caught in her hair, giving her an almost ethereal glow. She waved as I pulled up, but there was something different in her expression, something I couldn't quite place. I stepped out of the car, feeling the weight of the moment. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey," she replied softly, stepping down the stairs to meet me. "Thanks for coming." "Of course. What's going on?" I asked, trying to read her. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. There was an unease there that I hadn't noticed before. "I've been thinking a lot," she said quietly. "About us." I swallowed, my heart pounding. I don't know how to say this. "Emily, what's going on?" I asked, stepping closer, my heart racing. "I don't know how we got here, but I can't keep pretending like everything's fine," she said, looking away for a moment as she gathered her thoughts. "I can't keep ignoring it. I can't pretend I'm not falling for you, Alex." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been avoiding the truth for so long, pushing it down. But now, hearing her say it out loud, I felt the floodgates open. "I feel the same way," I admitted, my voice low. "I've been trying not to, but every time I see you, it just feels right. I can't ignore that anymore." Emily's gaze softened, and for a moment, I saw the vulnerability in her eyes. She stepped closer to me, her breath warm against my skin. "But I don't want to hurt anyone, Alex," she said, her voice trembling. "This is complicated. Your mom, I don't know what she'd think." The thought of my mom knowing what was happening between Emily and me terrified me. It felt like we were breaking some unspoken rule, crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed. "I don't know either," I whispered, my hands shaking slightly. "But I can't pretend anymore. I can't keep lying to myself. What we have is real." Emily reached up to touch my arm, and I could feel the tension in the air. Her touch was gentle, as if she were afraid of breaking something fragile. "I just don't want to make a mistake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, letting the silence settle between us. "Emily, I don't think this is a mistake. I think we've been through too much together, and what we have is worth fighting for." Her eyes searched mine, a mixture of fear and hope reflected in them. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly, "then let's take it one step at a time. Together." The following weeks were a whirlwind. Emily and I spent more time together than ever before, talking, laughing, and figuring out how to navigate this new chapter. The tension between us was still there, but it wasn't the same kind of tension. It was the kind that came from finally admitting something we both already knew, though we hadn't told anyone yet. It wasn't the right time. I wasn't sure how my mum would react, and I didn't want to cause unnecessary drama. But I could feel it. The world around us was changing, and I didn't know what would happen when we had to face the reality of our relationship. But for now, I was content. Every moment with Emily felt like it was worth everything we might face down the line. One night, a few weeks after our confession, Emily invited me over to her place. We were sitting on the couch talking about everything and nothing when I finally found the courage to say what had been on my mind. "Emily," I began, my voice steady. "I don't want to keep hiding this. I don't want to pretend we're just friends anymore." She turned to me, her face softening. "I don't want to hide it either, Alex, but we need to be sure. We need to know what we're getting ourselves into." "I know," I said, reaching for her hand. "But I'm ready if you are." Emily smiled, her eyes sparkling with something I hadn't seen before, pure, unguarded joy. "Then let's do this, Alex. Together." And in that moment, I knew that no matter what came next, I had made the right choice. The future was uncertain, but I didn't need to know what would happen tomorrow. I had her by my side, and that was all I needed.